I'm 28 now and I've been waiting for this moment for exactly 10 years. Not hoping for it, not fantasizing about it in some vague revenge daydream kind of way, but actively waiting for it, planning for it, building my entire adult life around the certainty that one day my father Damien, my brother Gavin, my uncle Lawson, and my aunt Hannah would come crawling back. And here we are. Let me back up because you need to understand how calculated this has been. I'm not some hero who rose above adversity and suddenly got surprised by karma working in my favor. I've been furious for a decade. And every single decision I made since I was 18 was specifically designed to put me in the position I'm in right now, watching them lose their minds outside my door. When I was growing up, my family treated me like I was defective. Not in the way some families pick on the weird kid or whatever, but in this methodical, deliberate way where they convinced themselves I was genuinely worthless and made sure I knew it every single day. My brother Gavin was 3 years older, athletic, got decent grades without trying, had friends, I was skinny, liked reading, kept to myself. My dad decided early on that I was a disappointment, and my brother was the golden child, and that became the family religion. My mom passed away when I was 7 and after that it got worse. Dad remarried when I was 9 to this woman Sherry who just went along with however he treated us. She never defended me, never questioned him. His brother Lawson and his wife Hannah lived 2 blocks away and they were around constantly and they bought into the same narrative. I was the family joke, the screw-up, the one who would never amount to anything. The breaking point, the thing I've been carrying around in my head for 10 years like a stone, happened on my 18th birthday. I remember every detail of that Thursday afternoon. Dad had me come into the living room where everyone was gathered. Gavin, Uncle Lawson, Aunt Hannah, Sherry hovering in the background. He handed me this envelope and told me it was my annual salary. Everyone started snickering before I even opened it. Inside was a single dollar bill and a note that said, "For the worthless loser who will never amount to anything." Gavin was laughing so hard he could barely breathe, saying that was still too much for such a pathetic failure. Uncle Lawson joined in with some comment about the family clown finally getting his first paycheck. Aunt Hannah was cackling about how even homeless people earned more than me. The entire room erupted. They thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. This hilarious joke they'd all coordinated to humiliate me on my birthday. I smiled. I folded the note, slipped it in my pocket, and I smiled at every single one of them. Because right then, standing in that living room with their laughter echoing around me, something locked into place in my head. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was done being hurt. I was going to destroy them, and I was going to do it methodically, and I was going to make sure they knew exactly why it was happening. That night, I overheard them in the kitchen planning the next phase of their entertainment. They wanted to make me sleep outside that night. Teach the lazy bum a lesson. See how long it took before I came crying to be let back in. I could hear Dad explaining how it would be good for me. Build character. Maybe I'd finally learn some respect. Gavin was enthusiastic about it. Nobody objected. I left that night with my backpack, my laptop, and that dollar bill. I crashed with my friend Steven for 3 days while I got my documentation together. Then I moved 2 hours away to start college early. I'd been accepted to a state university with a full academic scholarship that I'd kept secret from my family because I knew they'd find some way to ruin it or mock me out of going. The scholarship covered tuition and housing. I worked 2 jobs, saved every penny, and spent 4 years studying finance and computer science while my family assumed I'd failed out of life somewhere. Here's what they didn't know. What they still don't fully understand. I was good at what I studied. Really good. I graduated with honors, got recruited by a mid-sized investment firm, spent 3 years learning everything I could about asset management and financial planning, then moved to a better firm with better clients. I made connections, built a reputation, learned exactly how money works and how people protect it and how you identify weak points in someone's financial structure. By the time I was 25, I was making 6 figures in living in a downtown condo. I changed my phone number twice, never updated them on where I lived, never reached out. Total silence for 7 years, but I kept tabs on them. Social media made it easy. Dad still lived in the same house, still working the same middle management job he'd had my whole life. Gavin had dropped out of community college, was working retail, still living at home. Uncle Lawson ran a small contracting business that seemed to constantly be barely breaking even. Aunt Hannah worked part-time at a salon. The thing that made me really start paying attention was 3 years ago when I noticed Dad had started posting about financial stress. Nothing explicit, but you could read between the lines. Comments about the economy, about bills, about unexpected expenses. Gavin posted about his car breaking down and not being able to afford repairs. Uncle Lawson's business Facebook page stopped getting updated regularly. They were struggling and they were doing it without any safety net because people like them never plan properly. I knew eventually they'd reach out. People always do when they need something. I just had to wait for them to be desperate enough. And I had to make sure that when they came looking, they found exactly what I wanted them to find. 6 months ago, I bought a house. Not just any house, but a seriously nice 4-bedroom place in an upscale neighborhood about 40 minutes from where they lived. Close enough that word would get back to them eventually. I made sure my address was listed. Made sure my LinkedIn was updated with my current position and company. Made sure there were enough digital breadcrumbs that if they went looking, they'd find me living this obviously successful life. And then I waited. It took 3 months. 3 months before my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I knew. I just knew it was time. It was Gavin. His voice came through trying to sound casual, like we were old buddies who just lost touch. He said he'd been thinking about me, wondering how I was doing. Mentioned he'd seen I was doing well for myself. The conversation was painful in how transparent it was. He danced around whatever he actually wanted for about 10 minutes before finally admitting that Dad was having some financial difficulties, some unexpected medical bills, some things that had piled up, and they were looking at potentially losing the house. I let him talk. I didn't offer anything. Didn't volunteer information. Just listened to him explain their situation like I was supposed to feel sympathy. He said Dad had too much pride to call himself, but the family was hoping maybe I could help out. Maybe I could loan them some money or co-sign for something or offer some financial advice. He mentioned that Uncle Lawson's business was also struggling, that everyone was kind of going through it right now. When he finally stopped talking, I told him I'd think about it, just that I'd think about it. He sounded relieved, like that was already a victory. And he gave me Dad's current number and told me to call anytime. I didn't call. I spent 2 weeks looking into their actual financial situation, which wasn't hard given my profession and connections. Dad had remortgaged the house twice, had significant credit card debt, and was 3 months behind on payments. His medical bills were real, but not catastrophic, mostly related to some routine procedures that his insurance hadn't fully covered. Gavin had his own debt, mostly credit cards, and a car loan he couldn't afford. Uncle Lawson's business was hemorrhaging money, bad contracts, and poor management. And he had personal loans that were coming due. They were drowning, and they'd waited until they were actively going under before reaching out to the family member they'd spent 18 years treating like garbage. I called Dad on a Tuesday evening. He answered on the second ring, and his voice, when he realized it was me, was this weird mixture of relief and something else I couldn't quite identify. Shame maybe, but not enough of it. He started with this speech about family, about how blood matters, about how he knew we'd had our differences, but at the end of the day, we were all we had. I interrupted him and asked exactly how much money they needed. The directness threw him off. He stammered for a bit before admitting they needed about $40,000 to get current on everything and avoid foreclosure. Uncle Lawson needed another $20,000 for his business. $60,000 total. I told him I'd help them. I could hear the relief in his voice, the gratitude, the immediate shift to treating me like I was suddenly worthy of respect now that I had something he needed. He started talking about how we should get together, how he wanted to see my new place, how proud he was of how I turned out. That's when I told him my conditions. I'd helped him financially, but first we needed to have a conversation about the past. A real conversation in person where we addressed everything that had happened. I told him I needed to hear from all of them. Dad, Gavin, Uncle Lawson, Aunt Hannah, why they treated me the way they had, and I needed them to acknowledge what they'd done before I'd consider helping. There was silence on the phone. Then Dad said, "Of course, absolutely. They could talk about whatever I needed to talk about." He suggested Saturday. They could all come to my place. We could sit down as a family and work everything out. Saturday was 4 days ago. They showed up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. All 4 of them in Uncle Lawson's truck. I watched from my window as they parked, saw them taking in the house, the neighborhood, the reality of exactly how far I'd come without them. When I opened the door, the looks on their faces were priceless. Gavin especially looked like he couldn't process what he was seeing. We sat in my living room, them on one couch, me in a chair across from them. I had paperwork ready, documentation I'd prepared, but I started with the basics. I asked them if they remembered my 18th birthday. The room went quiet. Dad tried to deflect, said that was a long time ago, that they'd all been going through a tough time back then. Aunt Hannah actually tried to claim she didn't remember it at all. Gavin looked uncomfortable, but didn't say anything. I pulled out that dollar bill. I've kept it for 10 years, carried it with me, kept it as a reminder of exactly why I was building the life I was building. I unfolded it on the coffee table between us and told them I remembered every word, every laugh, every moment of that day. I told them about overhearing their plan to make me sleep outside. Dad's face changed. He tried to apologize, sort of. This half-hearted thing about how he'd been too hard on me sometimes, how he'd wanted to push me to be better. Uncle Lawson jumped in, saying they'd always believed in me deep down, that their approach had just been misguided. Aunt Hannah nodded along. Gavin stayed quiet. I asked them point blank, did they actually believe I was worthless, or was it just fun to treat me that way? Nobody had a good answer for that. They stammered through various attempts at explaining themselves, at justifying years of systematic emotional abuse as tough love or family dynamics or being from a different generation. None of it was an actual answer. None of it was accountability. That's when I told them the truth. I wasn't going to give them money. I wasn't going to loan them anything, co-sign anything, or provide any financial advice that would help them. But I was going to help them in a different way. I had spent the previous 2 weeks not just researching their financial situation, but actually making moves. I'd contacted Dad's mortgage lender and made an offer to purchase the house directly, buying out their debt at a discount. The lender had accepted. I'd done the same with Uncle Lawson's business loans, purchasing the debt from his creditors. I'd even bought Gavin's car loan from the finance company. I didn't tell them this to threaten them. I told them because I'd already filed the foreclosure paperwork on the house. I'd already initiated collection proceedings on the business loans. I'd already sent notice to Gavin about the car loan default and the vehicle would be repossessed within 72 hours. The house they lived in, the business Uncle Lawson had spent 20 years building, the car Gavin needed to get to work, I now owned all of it. Or rather, I owned their debt on all of it, which in practical terms meant I controlled whether they kept any of it. The looks on their faces when they understood what I was telling them. That's the image I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life. Pure panic, confusion, anger, disbelief, all happening at once. Dad started yelling about how this wasn't legal, how I couldn't do this to family. Uncle Lawson was demanding to know who I thought I was. Aunt Hannah was crying. Gavin just sat there looking like he was going to throw up. I explained very calmly that everything I'd done was completely legal. I'd purchased debt through legitimate channels, paid fair market value for it, and now I was the creditor. I had every right to pursue collection, including foreclosure and repossession. If they wanted to keep their house, their business, their car, they'd need to pay me back the full amount plus the interest and fees that were now accumulating. Dad asked how much time they had. I told him the foreclosure would be final in 90 days. The business loan had 60 days before I liquidated the assets. The car would be gone by Monday. Then I stood up and told them to leave. They didn't leave. They started begging. All 4 of them talking over each other, pleading for me to reconsider, saying they were sorry, saying they'd do anything. Dad tried to grab my arm, and I stepped back and told him again to leave my house. That's when it got really ugly. Gavin started screaming at me about how I was destroying the family, how I was no better than them, how this was cruel. Uncle Lawson was threatening legal action. Aunt Hannah was full-on sobbing. Dad was alternating between anger and desperate pleading. I walked to my front door and opened it. Told them they had 10 seconds to get out before I called the police for trespassing. They left finally, shouting and crying and making threats the whole way to the truck. What I didn't expect was for them to come back, but they did. That night at 11 p.m. They were outside my door, pounding on it, shouting, begging me to let them in, to talk to them, to reconsider. My neighbors definitely heard. I didn't open the door. I called the non-emergency police line and reported a disturbance. They've been back every day since, multiple times a day. Sometimes they leave notes. They send messages from new numbers when I block the old ones. They've had Sherry and some of their friends call me trying to mediate. They're desperate and panicking and exactly where I wanted them. And I still have the dollar bill sitting on my desk. The note that called me worthless. The reminder that every single thing I built, every accomplishment, every dollar I earned was because I turned their cruelty into motivation. The foreclosure is proceeding. The business liquidation is moving forward. The car is gone as of yesterday, and they're still outside begging, sobbing, screaming my name like I owe them something other than exactly what they gave me. So, yeah, that's where I am right now, watching my family fall apart because they finally encountered the one problem they can't bully or mock their way out of. And I'm not sure what happens next, but I know I'm not backing down. Update 1. Okay, so it's been 2 weeks since my last post and holy hell, things have escalated in ways I honestly didn't fully anticipate. Not that I'm backing down or anything, but I need to vent because the levels of audacity my family is displaying right now are absolutely insane. First off, shout out to everyone who commented on my original post. Some of you called me ruthless. Some of you said I went too far. And honestly, I don't care either way because this isn't about being the bigger person or taking the high road. This is about consequences. Real ones. The kind that actually hurt. For everyone who said I should just let it go and move on with my life, I was moving on with my life. They came to me. They showed up needing help after spending 18 years making sure I knew I was worthless. So, yeah, we're doing this. The harassment outside my house stopped after that first week, but only because I filed for a restraining order. Not against all of them, just Dad and Gavin specifically because they were the ones showing up at 2 a.m. banging on my door and screaming. The hearing was last Wednesday. And let me tell you, watching Dad try to explain to a judge why he needed to maintain contact with the son he admitted he hadn't spoken to in 7 years was deeply satisfying. The judge granted a temporary order good for 6 months prohibiting them from coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace. But here's where it gets complicated. About 5 days after I filed the restraining order, I got served with papers at my office. Dad and Uncle Lawson are suing me. Not just threatening to sue, actually suing me. They're claiming fraud, claiming I manipulated them, claiming the debt purchases were done under false pretenses and constitute elder abuse. Elder abuse. Dad is 53. Their argument, and I'm not making this up, is that I fraudulently induced them to meet with me under the guise of family reconciliation when my actual intent was to gather information to exploit their financial vulnerabilities. They're saying I committed intentional infliction of emotional distress. They want the debt purchases reversed. They want damages and they want the restraining order dropped. I met with my attorney on Friday. She's this sharp woman named Ella who I've worked with on some client contracts before. And she took one look at the lawsuit and started laughing. Not in a mean way, but in that way lawyers laugh when they see something that's going to be easy to demolish in court. She explained that everything I did was legal. That purchasing debt through legitimate channels isn't fraud regardless of my relationship to the debtors, and that their claim about inducing them to meet under false pretenses doesn't hold water because I explicitly told them we needed to discuss the past before I'd help. Financially. But here's the thing. Even though their lawsuit is garbage and will probably get dismissed in court, it's expensive garbage. I have to respond to it, have to go through discovery, have to potentially go to court. They know this. This is their new strategy. They can't pay back the debt. So, they're trying to make it so costly and annoying for me to collect that I'll just forgive it to make them go away. It's not going to work. But I have to admit, it's smarter than I gave them credit for. Dad isn't stupid. He's just been lazy his whole life, coasting on being the authority figure in the family. Uncle Lawson has run a business for 20 years, even if he ran it poorly. So, he understands how legal costs work. They found a lawyer willing to take their case on contingency. Some guy who apparently specializes in DTOR defense, And now they're playing the long game. Meanwhile, Sherry has been calling me. She's the only one not named in the restraining order because she wasn't part of the late-night harassment, and she's been leaving voicemails every other day. The first few were her trying to play mediator, saying everyone was sorry, saying family should forgive each other, asking if we could please just talk this through. I ignored those. Then her messages changed. She started getting angry, saying I was being cruel, that I didn't understand what it was like for them right now. She left one message where she was actually crying, talking about how they might have to move into an apartment, how humiliating this was, how the neighbors were asking questions. She said Gavin had to take the bus to work now and it was adding 2 hours to his commute each way. She said I was punishing people who'd already learned their lesson. Here's what made me actually angry though. In her most recent message 2 days ago, she said that what happened on my 18th birthday was just a joke that went too far. She said I was holding a grudge over something that wasn't meant to hurt me, that they were just teasing me the way families do. She said my mom would be disappointed in how I was treating my father. That one got to me, not because she was right, but because she had the audacity to invoke my dead mother to guilt me. My mom, who passed away when I was 7, who Sherry never even met, who Dad replaced within 2 years like she'd never existed. The absolute nerve of that woman to tell me what my mother would think. I called her back. First time I've actually engaged with any of them directly since they left my house. She answered immediately, sounded hopeful, started talking about how glad she was that I'd reached out. I cut her off and told her very clearly that if she ever mentioned my mother again, I would make her life specifically even worse than it already was. I told her that her attempts at manipulation were pathetic, that she'd stood by for years while Dad treated me like garbage and that her comfort wasn't my problem. Then I hung up. She hasn't called since. But I'm sure she told Dad about the call because things ramped up again after that. Uncle Lawson showed up at my workplace last Thursday. I don't know how he found out where exactly my office building was because I've never posted that information anywhere public, but there he was in the lobby trying to get past security. My receptionist called me and I went down to deal with it. He couldn't come up because he wasn't on the visitor list and the building requires ID check-in. So, we ended up having this confrontation in the lobby with like 20 people around. He tried to be calm at first, reasonable, said he just wanted 5 minutes to talk. I told him no. He said his business was about to be liquidated, that I was destroying 20 years of his work over something that had nothing to do with him. I reminded him that he'd been right there on my 18th birthday, laughing along with everyone else, calling me the family clown. He said that was ancient history, that people change, that he'd been following Dad's lead because that's what you do in families. That's when I asked him the question that had been bugging me for years. Why did he hate me so much? What did I actually do to deserve the treatment I got from all of them? He didn't have an answer. He stood there in my office building lobby looking increasingly desperate and he couldn't give me a single reason. Finally, he said that I reminded Dad of my mom that after she died, Dad couldn't look at me without seeing her and that made him angry. He said it was easier for Dad to make me the problem than to deal with his grief. So there it is, the actual reason. Dad couldn't handle losing Mom, so he took it out on the kid who looked like her and everyone else just went along with it because Dad was the patriarch and you don't question the patriarch. 20 years of systematic emotional abuse because my father couldn't cope with being a widower. I told Uncle Lawson to leave. He refused. Said he wasn't going anywhere until I agreed to meet with him and Dad and work something out. I called building security. They escorted him out. He was shouting the whole way about how I was going to regret this, how family meant something, how I couldn't just destroy people's lives. But I can actually. That's the thing they still don't understand. I have the legal right, the financial means, and the complete lack of emotional attachment necessary to follow through on everything I said I would do. They spent years making sure I felt nothing for them except anger. This is what happens when that investment pays off. The foreclosure sale on Dad's house is scheduled for 6 weeks from now. The business liquidation is moving forward. Uncle Lawson has 30 days left to remove his personal items from the building before everything gets auctioned off. Gavin's car got repossessed on schedule and sold at auction. I actually made a small profit on that one because it sold for more than he owed. And now I'm dealing with their lawsuit, which my attorney says will probably be dismissed within 3 months, but still requires me to respond and participate in discovery. They've requested documentation of all my communications with them, all my financial records related to the debt purchases and depositions from me and from any witnesses who can speak to the circumstances of our meeting at my house. I'm complying with everything because I have nothing to hide. Every communication was documented. Every transaction was legal. Every step was carefully planned to be completely above board. That's what they don't get. I didn't do anything illegal or unethical. I just used the exact same systems that exist to crush poor people every day, and I used them against my own family because they deserved it. Here's what's keeping me up at night, though, and I can't believe I'm admitting this on Reddit, but whatever. Aunt Hannah reached out through Facebook Messenger last week. Not begging, not angry, just asking if she could talk to me. I haven't responded yet because I'm not sure what her angle is. See, Aunt Hannah was always the most passive of all of them. She went along with everything, laughed at all the jokes, but she never initiated the cruelty. She was just there, present for all of it, never defending me, but never actively attacking me either. She was married to Uncle Lawson, and she did what he did. When I think about my childhood, my specific memories of her are just nothing. She was wallpaper, but now she's messaging me saying she needs to talk to me about something important. Something about Uncle Lawson that I should know. She's not begging for money or asking me to stop the liquidation. She just wants to talk privately without telling anyone else in the family. Part of me thinks it's a trap that they're trying a new tactic, sending in the least threatening family member to get me to let my guard down. But part of me is curious about what she could possibly have to say that would be important enough to risk reaching out. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to respond. My attorney advised against any direct contact with family members while the lawsuit is ongoing. Said anything I say could be used against me in court, but the message is sitting there in my inbox. This little unanswered question. Meanwhile, I found out through a mutual acquaintance that Gavin has been telling people I'm mentally ill, that I've had a breakdown, that I'm acting irrationally, that the family is trying to get me help, but I won't accept it. He's been posting vague things on social media about mental health and the importance of intervention. It's actually kind of fascinating watching him try to control the narrative. Like, if he can convince enough people that I'm unstable, then somehow that makes what I'm doing less justified. It's not going to work. Everyone who knows me professionally knows exactly how stable and competent I am. My colleagues, my clients, my boss, they all see me as reliable and successful. Gavin's attempts to paint me as crazy just make him look desperate. But it does show that they're trying everything. Legal action, emotional manipulation, character assassination, sending in different family members to test my defenses. They're not going down without a fight, which honestly I respect more than if they just accepted defeat. At least this way, it feels like actual revenge rather than just watching them suffer passively. The question now is what happens when Aunt Hannah's mysterious information comes out. Whether Uncle Lawson showing up at my work violated some kind of harassment law I can use against him. Whether Dad and Uncle Lawson's lawsuit gets dismissed quickly or drags on for months. Whether any of them will actually really admit what they did and why it was wrong. I'm not backing down. Want to make that clear before anyone in the comments tries to tell me I should take the settlement offer or whatever. There is no settlement. There is no reconciliation. There's just them facing the consequences of decades of abuse and me making sure those consequences stick. The dollar bill is still on my desk, still there as a reminder every time I start to feel even slightly guilty about any of this. They made me into this person. They spent 18 years teaching me that family meant nothing, that love was conditional, that I was worthless. Now they're learning what someone they convinced was worthless can do when he turns out to be worth quite a lot. So yeah, that's the update. Lawsuit incoming, family escalating, and me sitting here with all the power wondering exactly how far I'm willing to take this. And honestly, I think the answer is as far as it goes. Alright, Reddit. Buckle up because this update is going to be long and messy. And honestly, I'm still processing half of it. For everyone who told me not to meet with Aunt Hannah, that it was obviously a trap, I hear you. But I did it anyway because I needed to know what she wanted to tell me. And now I kind of wish I'd listened to you because what she told me has made this whole situation even more twisted than it already was. So, first, the practical updates. Their lawsuit got a preliminary hearing date set for next month. My attorney, Ella, filed a motion to dismiss, and we're waiting on the judge's decision, but in the meantime, we have to proceed like it's going forward. Discovery has started, which means I've had to hand over a massive amount of documentation about the debt purchases, every email and text exchange I had with any of them, financial records, all of it. It's been tedious, but I'm not worried because, like I said before, everything I did was completely legal. The foreclosure sale on Dad's house is now 3 weeks away. I got a notice that they filed for bankruptcy protection trying to delay it, which is apparently a common tactic. My attorney says it'll slow things down by maybe a month, but won't stop the foreclosure entirely. Uncle Lawson's business building is already listed for auction. The sale is in 2 weeks. Neither of them has made a single payment toward their debts since this all started, which honestly just proves they never had any intention of actually paying anything back, even if I had given them money. Gavin has apparently moved in with some friend because he can't afford his own place without a car to get to work reliably. I know this because Sure sent me a long email about it, detailing how I've disrupted everyone's lives, how Gavin is struggling, how this is all my fault. I didn't respond. There's nothing to say to that. But here's where things get complicated. I agreed to meet with Aunt Hannah last Monday. Not at my house, not at hers, and not somewhere public where we could be seen. We met at a park about 30 minutes outside the city, one of those places with walking trails and picnic areas that's basically empty on a weekday afternoon. I got there early, scoped it out to make sure nobody else from the family was around waiting to ambush me, and then sat at a picnic table and waited. She showed up 15 minutes late, driving this beat-up sedan that I remembered from years ago. She looked older than I remembered, tired. And when she sat down across from me, she didn't try to hug me or do any of that fake family reunion stuff. She just sat there for a minute, like she was trying to figure out how to start. Finally, she told me she was leaving Uncle Lawson, not because of the business failing or the lawsuit, but because she'd been planning to leave him for over a year, and this whole situation had finally given her the push she needed. She said she'd already contacted a divorce attorney, already had papers drawn up, and she was filing next week. I asked her what this had to do with me and why I should care. She said it had everything to do with me because the reason she was leaving him, the reason she'd stayed quiet all these years was connected to why our family had treated me the way they did. This is where it gets really messed up. Aunt Hannah told me that Uncle Lawson had been in love with my mother. Not just like admired her or thought she was nice, but actually in love with her. Before she married Dad when they were all younger, Lawson had wanted to be with her. She chose Dad instead. Lawson married Hannah basically as a consolation, someone who looked similar enough, someone who would be a replacement. When my mom died, Lawson apparently had this breakdown that he hid from everyone. Hannah said he became obsessed with the idea that if my mom had chosen him instead, she wouldn't have died. Like somehow being with Dad is what caused her illness. None of that makes logical sense, obviously, but grief doesn't work on logic. The thing is, I look exactly like my mom. Everyone always said that growing up. Same eyes, same facial structure, same build. And according to Hannah, Lawson couldn't stand seeing me because it reminded him of what he'd lost. He pushed Dad to treat me badly because it made it easier for Lawson to be around if I was being put down, diminished, made to feel worthless. If I was the family joke, then Lawson didn't have to confront the fact that I was walking around looking exactly like the woman he'd spent 20 years being angry about losing. Dad went along with it because, like Lawson told me at my office, I reminded him of Mom too, and he couldn't handle that grief either. So these two brothers, both unable to process losing my mother, both turned me into this target for all their unresolved issues. And Hannah knew. She'd known the whole time. She said she stayed quiet because she didn't know what else to do. That challenging Lawson would have meant confronting the fact that her entire marriage was based on being someone's second choice. I sat there listening to all this and I didn't know whether to be furious or just tired. Because on one level, now I finally understand why. There was a reason beyond just random cruelty. But on another level, that reason is so messed up and so unfair that it almost makes it worse. I got tortured for 18 years because two grown men couldn't handle their feelings about a dead woman. I asked Hannah why she was telling me this now. She said because she wanted me to know that what they did to me wasn't about me at all, that I didn't deserve any of it, that she should have protected me and she didn't. And she was sorry. She said she knew sorry didn't fix anything. But she needed to say it anyway. Then she told me something that changed the whole calculation of what I'm doing. Uncle Lawson has a daughter from a previous relationship before he married Hannah. Her name is Ariana. She's 25 and she lives about 4 hours away. I'd never heard about her before. Didn't know she existed. Apparently, Lawson barely has a relationship with her, pays minimal child support, sees her maybe once a year. Hannah gave me Ariana's contact information. She said that when the business gets liquidated, Ariana is supposed to inherit a portion of the proceeds per the terms of Lawson's will, but if the business goes under the way it's heading, there won't be anything left. Hannah said Ariana is a single mom with 2 kids working as a nurse struggling to make ends meet. And the inheritance from her dad's business was the only financial safety net she had. So now I have this information that there's a completely innocent person, someone who had nothing to do with how I was treated, who's going to get hurt by what I'm doing to Uncle Lawson. Ariana never mocked me, never laughed at me, didn't even know I existed. But she's going to lose out on money she was counting on because I'm destroying her father's business as revenge for what he did to me. Hannah didn't ask me to stop. She just gave me the information and said I should know the full picture of who gets hurt by this. Then she got up and left. Drove away in her beat-up car and that was it. I sat at that picnic table for another hour just thinking because this is exactly the kind of complication I didn't want to deal with when it was just Dad, Gavin, Uncle Lawson, and Hannah suffering. That was simple. They all participated in what happened to me. They all deserved consequences. But now there's this woman, Ariana, who's just trying to raise her kids and make ends meet, and she's going to be collateral damage. I looked Ariana up when I got home, found her social media, saw pictures of her kids, saw posts about picking up extra shifts at the hospital, about trying to save money for her daughter's school expenses. She looks nothing like Uncle Lawson. Must take after her mom. She has a couple posts about her dad, but they're distant, obligatory birthday wishes and stuff like that. Nothing that suggests a close relationship. Here's what's been eating at me for the past week. If I go through with liquidating Uncle Lawson's business the way I planned, I'm not just punishing him. I'm punishing his daughter and grandkids who never did anything to me. But if I stop now, if I show mercy because of collateral damage, then what was the point of any of this? Uncle Lawson doesn't get to escape consequences just because he has a daughter who might get hurt. I talked to my attorney about it. She said that business liquidations happen all the time and lots of people get hurt by them. That I can't be responsible for every person who might be negatively impacted by a legitimate legal action. She reminded me that Ariana's inheritance wasn't guaranteed anyway. That businesses fail for all kinds of reasons. And this isn't any different just because I'm the one making it happen deliberately, but it feels different. It is different because I'm not some impersonal market force or economic downturn. I'm a person with a specific grudge actively choosing to destroy this business. And I know full well that an innocent person is going to suffer for it. Meanwhile, Dad and Gavin have apparently figured out that I met with Hannah because I got an absolutely unhinged message from Gavin asking what lies she told me, saying she's mentally unstable and going through some kind of crisis, saying I shouldn't believe anything she says. Which is interesting because it confirms that whatever she told me, they're worried about it. I also got a message from Dad, much calmer than Gavin's, asking if we could meet face to face to discuss things. He said he's willing to have a real conversation about the past, that he's been doing a lot of thinking and he wants to try to make things right. He suggested meeting at a neutral location, just the two of us, no lawyers or other family members involved. I haven't responded to either of them yet because I genuinely don't know what to say. Part of me wants to meet with Dad just to hear what possible justification he's come up with now. Part of me thinks it's pointless because nothing he says will change what I'm doing. And part of me is still stuck on this Ariana situation trying to figure out if there's a way to proceed that doesn't hurt someone who's completely innocent. The foreclosure is still moving forward. The business auction is still scheduled. Their lawsuit is still active. Everything I set in motion is still happening whether I've figured out the moral complications or not. That's the thing about revenge. Once you start the machinery moving, it doesn't stop just because you start having second thoughts. I tried reaching out to Ariana yesterday. Sent her a message on Facebook introducing myself as her father's nephew, saying I had some information about his business that might affect her, asking if she'd be willing to talk. She hasn't responded yet, and honestly, I'm not sure what I'll say if she does. Hi, I'm the cousin you didn't know existed, and I'm currently destroying your dad's livelihood as revenge for childhood trauma. Just thought you should know. One of the comments on my last post asked how far I'm willing to take this, and at the time, I said, as far as it goes. But now I'm actually having to confront what that means. Does it mean hurting people who never hurt me? Does it mean accepting collateral damage as an unavoidable consequence? Or does it mean finding some way to navigate this that still punishes the people who deserve it without destroying innocent bystanders? I don't have answers yet. What I do have is 3 weeks until the house forecloses, 2 weeks until the business auction, and a growing list of people who want to meet with me to convince me to stop what I'm doing. Dad wants to meet. Gavin is sending increasingly desperate messages. Sherry is back to calling and leaving voicemails. And somewhere out there is a woman named Ariana who has no idea that her financial future is tangled up in her father's decades-old inability to process grief. The dollar bill is still on my desk, still folded exactly the way it was when they gave it to me 10 years ago. The note still says I'm worthless and I'm still angry, still certain that what they did to me deserves consequences. But for the first time since this all started, I'm not sure if the consequences I'm delivering are the right ones. So yeah, that's where we are. Everything is more complicated. Nothing is resolved, and I have about a dozen major decisions to make in the next couple weeks that will determine whether this ends with clean revenge or messy collateral damage. I'm open to perspectives from you guys because honestly, I'm in deep enough that I'm not sure I can see this clearly anymore. Update me when you've got thoughts because I've got 3 weeks to figure out if I'm the person who goes through with this no matter what or if I'm the person who finds another way. And right now, I genuinely don't know which one I am. Final update. This is probably going to be my last update on this situation because everything that was going to happen has happened and I need to move forward with my life. For everyone who's been following along, thank you for the perspectives, the support, and yeah, even the criticism. This whole thing has been the most intense few months of my life. And I'm glad I had somewhere to process it all. So, let me start with the big stuff. The foreclosure sale on Dad's house happened last Tuesday. They didn't show up for it, didn't try to bid, just let it go through. The house sold for about $15,000 less than what was owed on it, which means Dad still technically owes me that difference plus fees. But my attorney advised me to just write it off as a loss rather than pursue it further. The people who bought it are a young couple with a baby and they got a decent deal on a solid house in a good neighborhood. Life moves on. Uncle Lawson's business building sold at auction the week before. That one actually went for more than expected because the location is good and the building itself is in decent shape despite the business failing. After paying off what he owed me and covering the auction fees, there was about $30,000 left over. That money legally belongs to Uncle Lawson's estate, which means it would eventually filter down to Ariana per his will. But here's what I did, and I'm sure some of you will have opinions about this. I contacted Ariana directly before the auction. She responded to my Facebook message after a few days, cautious but curious about who I was and what I wanted. We had a long conversation, mostly over messages, because she works weird hours at the hospital and coordinating a phone call was hard. I told her the basics, that I was her father's nephew, that we'd had a falling out over family issues, and that his business was being liquidated as part of a debt collection. I explained that she was listed as a beneficiary in his will and that there would be proceeds from the sale, but probably not as much as he'd originally intended for her to inherit. I didn't go into details about the revenge aspect or about why I was the one holding his debt. I just gave her the practical information she needed. She was surprisingly calm about it. Said she'd never counted on getting anything from her father anyway, that he'd been mostly absent her whole life, and she'd learned not to rely on him for anything. She asked if there was a way to expedite getting whatever money was left so she could use it for her kids' education fund. And I told her I'd make sure that happened. When the auction proceeds came through, I had my attorney structure it so that the $30,000 went directly to Ariana rather than going through Uncle Lawson first. It's slightly irregular, but not illegal. And it meant she got the money immediately instead of having to wait for probate or deal with her father trying to claim it first. She sent me a message thanking me, saying it was more than she'd expected and it would make a real difference for her family. So, that's one piece of collateral damage I managed to minimize. Ariana got something out of this mess, and Uncle Lawson lost his business completely without even getting to control what happened to the remaining assets. He's been sending me angry messages about it, claiming I stole from him, but legally everything was above board, and he has no recourse. Now, for the harder part. I met with Dad. I know a lot of you told me not to, that it was pointless, that he didn't deserve my time, but I needed to do it. Not for him, but for me. I needed to look him in the face one more time and hear what he had to say now that everything was done. We met at a diner about halfway between where I live and where he's currently staying, which is apparently Gavin's friend's apartment because he had to move out of the house before the sale. It was a Thursday afternoon. The place was mostly empty, and when I walked in, he was already sitting in a booth in the back, looking smaller and older than I remembered. I sat down across from him and waited for him to start talking. He didn't do the whole apology routine right away, which actually surprised me. Instead, he asked how I was doing, if my job was going well, if I was happy with my life. Small talk, like we were distant relatives catching up at a reunion instead of two people who'd just gone through months of legal warfare. I told him to skip the pleasantries and say whatever he'd asked me here to say. He nodded, took a breath, and started talking. He said he'd spent the last few months thinking about what kind of father he'd been, what kind of person he'd been, and he'd come to the conclusion that he'd failed me in every way that mattered. He said losing Mom had broken something in him that he'd never fixed. And instead of dealing with that, he'd taken it out on me because I reminded him of her every single day. He said Uncle Lawson had encouraged the cruelty, had pushed him to be harder on me, and he'd gone along with it because it was easier than confronting his own grief. He said Gavin had learned to treat me badly by watching how Dad treated me, and that was on him, too. He said he'd turned his own pain into a weapon and used it against a kid who'd lost his mother, too, and deserved support instead of abuse. This was all stuff I basically already knew, either from what Uncle Lawson had said at my office or from what Aunt Hannah had told me. But hearing Dad actually say it out loud, actually acknowledge what he'd done and why, that hit different. I sat there listening and I didn't interrupt because I wanted to hear all of it. He said he knew asking for forgiveness was pointless, that he destroyed any right to have a relationship with me. And he wasn't asking me to stop what I was doing or to give him money or to make any of this easier on him. He just wanted me to know that he understood finally what he'd done, that he saw me clearly now in a way he'd refused to for 18 years. And he was proud of who I'd become despite everything he'd done to try to destroy me. Then he told me something I wasn't expecting. He said that when I left at 18, when I disappeared and cut contact completely, he told himself it was proof that I was weak, that I couldn't handle the real world, that I'd come crawling back eventually. But when years passed and I didn't come back, when he realized I was actually out there building a life without them, something in him started to crack. He said he'd think about me sometimes and wonder what I was doing, if I was okay, if I ever thought about them. When Gavin found me through social media and saw that I was successful, Dad said his first reaction was anger. Anger that I'd proven him wrong, that everything he'd said about me being worthless had turned out to be a lie he'd told himself to justify his own behavior. He said, seeing my house, my life, the concrete evidence that I'd done exactly what he'd said I'd never do, it forced him to confront the fact that the problem had never been me. It had always been him. I asked him why he didn't reach out himself instead of sending Gavin. He said cowardice. Pure cowardice and pride. That he'd wanted to believe they could get my help without having to actually acknowledge the past. That they could just show up asking for money and I'd give it to them because that's what family does. He said he'd been delusional enough to think I owed them something. We sat there for a while after he finished talking. The waitress came by and I ordered coffee just to have something to do with my hands. Dad didn't order anything. Eventually, I asked him what he wanted from this conversation, what he expected me to say or do. He said he didn't expect anything. That he'd lost the house, lost his savings, would probably be renting for the rest of his life, and that was fine. He said those were just consequences, just things, and he could live with losing all of it. What he couldn't live with was never telling me that he was sorry, really sorry. Not because he wanted something from me, but because I deserved to hear it. He said he'd spent 10 years wondering if I was okay after I left. And another 7 years knowing I was not just okay, but thriving. And the whole time he'd been too much of a coward to reach out and admit he'd been wrong. He said this whole situation, as painful as it had been, had forced him to finally confront what he'd done. And that even though I'd destroyed his financial stability, even though he was starting over at 53 with nothing, he was grateful that I'd made him face the truth. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to tell him that his apology meant nothing, that it was too late, that he couldn't undo 18 years of abuse with one conversation in a diner. But another part of me recognized that this was what I'd wanted all along. Not just revenge, but acknowledgement. Real acknowledgement of what had been done to me and why it was wrong. I told him that I accepted his apology in the sense that I heard it and understood he meant it. But I also told him that accepting an apology doesn't mean forgiveness, doesn't mean reconciliation, doesn't mean we're going to have a relationship going forward. I told him that what he did to me shaped who I became, and I can't separate the good parts of my life now from the anger and determination that came from being treated the way he treated me. He nodded like he understood. Said he didn't expect forgiveness, didn't deserve it, said if I never wanted to see him again, that was completely fair. But he asked if maybe someday in the future if I ever wanted to talk, if I ever needed anything or just wanted to check in, his door would be open. Not because he thought he had any right to be in my life, but because despite everything he'd done, he was still my father and he still cared what happened to me. I told him I'd think about it, which is the most honest answer I could give. We finished our coffee, or I finished mine while he just sat there, and then we left. We didn't hug, didn't shake hands, just walked out to our separate cars and drove away in different directions. Since then, I've been processing what that conversation meant and where it leaves me. The legal stuff is mostly wrapped up. Their lawsuit got dismissed 2 weeks ago. The judge ruled that the debt purchases were legal and their claims of fraud had no merit. Dad and Uncle Lawson have to pay my legal fees, which is another few thousand they don't have. But my attorney is working out a payment plan rather than trying to collect it all at once. Gavin hasn't contacted me directly since the foreclosure. I've seen through mutual acquaintances that he's still living with his friend, still working retail, still apparently telling people that I'm mentally ill. And this whole thing was some kind of breakdown on my part. I don't care what he tells people. The people who matter know the truth. Uncle Lawson sent me one final message after the business sold, saying that I destroyed his life's work over a childhood grudge and that he hoped I was happy with myself. I didn't respond. There's nothing to say to someone who still doesn't understand that spending 20 years systematically destroying a kid's self-worth might have consequences. Aunt Hannah finalized her divorce last week. She sent me a message letting me know, saying she was moving to another state to be closer to her sister, starting fresh. She said she hoped I was doing okay and that she was sorry again for everything. I told her I appreciated her honesty about Uncle Lawson and wished her luck with her fresh start. As for me, I'm back to my normal life. Work is busy. I'm up for a promotion next quarter. I'm dating someone casually, though nothing serious yet. My house is still my house. My career is still on track. And the dollar bill is still on my desk. But something has shifted. I'm not carrying around the same burning anger that I had before. Don't get me wrong. I'm not over what happened to me, and I'm not pretending that one apology makes up for 18 years of abuse. But the specific need for revenge, that drive that shaped every decision I made for a decade, that's satisfied now. They lost what mattered to them. They faced consequences. They had to confront what they'd done. And more than that, I proved to myself that I wasn't worthless. That the note they gave me on my 18th birthday was a lie. That I could build a life, be successful, have power, and use that power to protect myself and hold people accountable. That was always the point. Not just making them suffer, but proving to myself that they were wrong about me. Someone in the comments on my first post asked if this was worth it, if destroying my family's financial stability was really going to make me feel better. The honest answer is, I don't know if it made me feel better, but it made me feel vindicated. It made me feel like justice actually happened instead of just moving on and pretending the past didn't matter. Would I do it again if I had to make the choice over? Yeah, I think I would. Because the alternative was letting them back into my life on their terms, helping them out financially while they never really confronted what they'd done to me. And that would have eaten at me forever, knowing I'd had the power to hold them accountable and chose not to use it. The dollar bill is staying on my desk, though not as a reminder of revenge anymore, but as a reminder of where I came from and what I survived. Every time I see it, I remember that I was 18 years old standing in that living room while my entire family laughed at me. And I smiled because I already knew I was going to prove them all wrong. And I did. So, that's the end of this story. Dad lost his house. Uncle Lawson lost his business. Gavin lost his car. And I got to watch all of it happen knowing it was because of choices I made. They're not begging outside my door anymore. They're just living with the consequences of their own actions finally after years of avoiding them. And me, I'm just living my life successfully, independently without them, which was always the real victory. Anyway, for everyone who followed along, who gave advice, who shared their own stories, thank you. This has been the wildest ride of my life, and I'm glad I had somewhere to process it all. I'm done posting about this situation now. Time to move forward. The worthless loser is doing just fine.